Story 1. I did this for about 4 years. Straight out of university into the drilling industry as a contractor. I did as many contracts as I could, back to back. Owned nothing that didn't fit in my backpack. Lived in hotels in Bali, Malaysia, and Singapore during my limited time off. Saved a lot of cash in those years and set myself up for life. Story 2. If you are working that much, you have no time for anything else in life except food and sleep. So if you have 24 hours a day and you're using 16 to 18 of them on work, that's all your life is. Work, quick meal, sleep. Weekends off, I guess. But you're probably sleeping a lot and preparing to go back to work next week. $350,000 a year at double work week hours comes down to roughly $80 an hour. Not too shabby, but I assumed an average 85-hour work week, work every single week, no vacation, no holiday, and that I'm not getting overtime pay or bonuses. So the question is, what am I doing for $80 an hour? If it's not that hard a job or I have good coworkers and a nice job atmosphere, then yeah, I'll do $80 an hour. But if it's grueling or annoying, then the realization that I have zero outside time and no way to get away will stop me. Also, you have to accept the fact that you do nothing but work. No time to enjoy your money, no sick leave, no dates with a significant other, no visiting friends outside work. But if you don't care about those things, then that's not a problem. A pass. My life is worth more than $350,000 a year. Story 3. Lots of people do this, but generally as a means to an end. Early career lawyers, doctors, and bankers all put in those kinds of hours. But you do it so you can settle in at maybe 60 hours a week for even more money later in your career. Story 4. What is the job? What is the stress level like? Vacations? Benefits? Is it fulfilling or important? In reality, the answer, whatever the job is yes, unless it is especially dangerous. I may not stick with it long, but I would probably take it. I bet the title alone would be worth it for future prospects. Story 5. I did this. I lasted approximately 1.5 years. I was able to buy a house and put down a solid chunk for retirement. My wife told me, "You working this much is not what I signed up for." She helped me realize that was not a good way to live. Set us up well. I would not go back and not do it, but I also would not do it again in my life. Story 6. Real work or 80 to 90 hours a week kind of work? You know, the old, I work 100 hours a week, but spend 3/4 of it passed out in the bathroom thing. Story 7. It depends on the context. What would I be doing? Is it something that I enjoy or something that I dislike? Can I automate any part of it? What are the growth opportunities? Can I change what I am doing? Or am I stuck with the same tasks repeatedly? Can I move forward with a different role or responsibilities? Do I have the opportunity to move into a different role in the same or another company? Is there profit sharing and good medical and retirement benefits? There is a lot to consider, and that's just the start. Story 8. Teach in a public school and already put in that many hours. People think we have summer off and it's a vacation. It's really compensation for all that overtime we didn't get paid during the school year. Story 9. I've done it. It's called getting a doctor of philosophy. I surely didn't earn that kind of money though. Also, no. I missed a lot of my oldest life trying to survive as he grew. I'm not doing that again. Story 10. No, I make $190,000 working 40 to 50 hours. 80 to 90 hours means no life whatsoever. I would maybe do it for a year with zero increase in my cost of living and invest everything. It would set me up really well. Story 11. Does that 80 hours include sending emails before bed and time spent traveling and in airports, etc.? Because if it does, I'm basically there already, so yes, I would. If you're just referring to literally being in front of a computer on Zoom calls for 80 hours or making phone calls, I'd need that first number to be more like $800,000. Story 12. Totally. I am used to working 60-ish hours a week for about $50,000. I could work that for a couple of years and build up enough savings to get another job. Story 13. Yes, as long as I keep my current job in risk management and business continuity. It is so incredibly diverse and interesting that it makes time just fly by. I am a single man without commitments. Let's do this. Story 14. Had some friends that jumped into a Chinese startup. Salary was around 139,000 US dollars a month working on artificial intelligence and autonomous drive solutions. Minimum of 12 hours per day, 7 days a week. They went in as young men full of happiness. Now they've aged a decade, overweight, greasy, living off junk food. They're very wealthy now, but they're spending a lot on health solutions and can't really enjoy their wealth. Their kids have grown up without them. One man was in the intensive care unit having his blood cleaned. You could see the fat being washed out. Story 15. I have seen people do that, making money I can only dream about, funding lifestyles for people they hardly ever see. I'm not going to criticize anyone's decisions on how they're living their lives. But my bills are paid and I know my children. I've made my choice. Story 16. Anyone saying yes has never worked close to that many hours. Even if you're working 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, that's only 56 hours. You'd need to work at least a 12-hour shift every single day of the week. You're going to burn out extremely fast. Story 17. I did this exact thing for 5 years and deeply regret it. It is not escape velocity money, and you can never get your health, youth, friends, or time back. The biggest regret of my life so far. Story 18. Because I like having time to do more than sleep and eat. Like, what is the point of making a ton of money if I have no time to use it or spend time with loved ones? Sounds like a recipe for misery and burnout. Story 19. If it's 52 weeks a year, then the hourly rate is around $75 per hour. I currently make $65 an hour and get 5 weeks of paid vacation. Not sure I'd bother. Maybe if I were in my early 20s again. Story 20. What would you do with the money, since you'd be working 13 hours a day, 7 days a week? Start work at 8 a.m., be done by 9, and then eat dinner, I guess? Talk to a human for a bit, maybe? And then you'd better get to sleep so you aren't tired tomorrow. You've got a long day ahead of you, Chief. Sounds like hell. No one should have to work that much. However, a lot of people do work that much for a lot less. So, I guess for those poor souls, this sounds like a good deal. Hooray for capitalism. Story 21. For a year, then I would buy a little 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom cottage and figure out if I can keep going a little while longer. Make it work for as long as I can, and then find something else. I would treat it as a means to an end, but it would also depend on the work. Story 22. I did that in my 30s at a law firm for about half the pay and would not recommend it. I would not do it now for that pay because it is not worth it. I would rather have a life. Story 23. I have worked that much for less. I can promise you it will destroy you no matter your salary. I do not think most of you know what working 90 hours all year is like. Story 24. It depends strongly on the work. Why are not more people considering this? If you love your work and if it is a big part of what you call living, then sure, why not? I mean, if you are an artist, a painter, for example, I think you would happily scream yes at doing that 90 hours a week. The same goes for thousands of other jobs people enjoy and do passionately. But if you have to sit in a cubicle staring at a monitor and figuring out who the company should fire next, then sure, hell no. Story 25. I've basically done a job similar to this. Sell your soul for dollars. It helped me save a deposit for a house in 12 months. But I can confirm from experience that it is most definitely not worth it. Everything suffers, your health, your family, your social life, everything. It's good for a specific goal for a short period, but beyond that, unless you want no life outside of work and have an absolute passion for what you're doing, it's not worth it. Some people do want that life and full respect to them, but it's not for everyone. Story 26. Absolutely not. If I am going to trade away my time and wellness, I would need to be making millions. Even then, I could not work 80-hour weeks for more than a year or 2 years, maybe. Story 27. Absolutely not. That's just suicide with extra steps. I don't even think that's physically possible for a long time. I have heard some people claim they are working these insane hours, but I have a really hard time believing if this is even real. I'm half dead with only working 40 hours, and I think even that's a crazy unnecessary amount. 80 to 90 hours per week comes close to the work times of the Industrial Revolution, where people worked 14 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. Big surprise. People died of exhaustion, and those who survived it wanted to. Story 28. It's $84 per hour. Not that great for no chance of advancement and stuck at 80 hours. But a lot of us are working 60 hours to make ends meet, so your answer will depend on each person's situation. Before starting a family, I did this. Story 29. Depends on whether I would be making a difference. 80 to 90 hours require messianic devotion, and even with that, you run out of gas in 1 to 2 years. At least I did. Story 30. Never. I am not compromising on my time. To me, it is more valuable than money after a certain point. 1 to 2 vacations a year, a living arrangement where everyone in the household gets their own room, and the ability to spontaneously do things from time to time, like eating out or going to the movies or whatever. That is what I want from life financially, and I can get that with 37.5 to 45 hours a week and still have money left to save. Story 31. Depending on the specifics of the work, if it's something I like or something I want to do, I think I would work. In other cases, I think that no, I would hardly work. Story 32. Depends on the job, to be honest. Am I physically and mentally drained? Or is it something I like doing that is actually giving me energy? Either way, I would definitely give it a shot. Even if I can just do it for a few months, that money would change my life. Tons of people work that much for much less. It's doable if you want to make working your life for a while. Story 33. I would do it for 5 years or so, save most of it, then quit and go back to my comfortable 24 hours per week for $100,000. It would be a pleasant life from there. I couldn't imagine doing it longer, though. The burnout would be real. The most I've done is 60 hours a week, and even that was rough. Story 34. Lots of people making that range of salary do work that much, or at least at one point. I could make that right now, but I do not want to work that much. Anyone who thinks that is a ton of money has not come to the realization that there is as much money out there to be made as you want. Want to make $1 million a year? You can, but it is going to require sacrifices though. At least for most, easy money is extremely rare. Also, one thing I realized making less than $40,000 a year in my 20s and over $200,000 at 40, anything under $1 million a year is not that rich. You will have more flexibility in life, but you are still going to have to budget things. Story 35. $350,000 is an awkward number. While that is a lot of money, it is not retire in 5 to 10 years money unless you can also nearly zero out your expenses. 80 to 90 hours a week is basically 10 to 12-hour days every day. That is going to destroy any kind of social life you have and basically make any responsibilities around children nearly impossible. On top of that, the temptation to eat prepared food and not do any kind of exercise is going to be very great. For me, at least, it is sacrificing too much without enough of a payout at the end. Now, if you have a very specific goal, like buying a house, that is achievable in a few years of doing nothing but work, and you will not be abandoning a significant other or kids to do it, and there are other work opportunities you can quickly shift into after a few years, then I cannot say it is inherently a bad idea. Story 36. As a medical resident, I had many months working 80 to 90 hours per week for $58,000 per year, especially during the second COVID-19 surge. I didn't know any better. Story 37. Honestly, no, it's far too much time away from my family. Assuming it's a 5-day work week, that's 18 hours of work with 6 hours of rest between shifts. Assuming as soon as I finished I was able to go straight to sleep, which I'd need to do to get sufficient rest. So that's 5 days of very short rest with no time for my family. On my days off, I'd be too tired to do anything with my family due to the lack of sufficient rest during the week. It would be a terrible family life. Story 38. $350,000 a year is roughly $168 an hour for a 40-hour week. But if you are working 80 to 90 hours a week, you are spending all your life working for $84 and never having a life to spend it. So no, I would not do it. Story 39. I worked at a Big Four accounting firm for 10 years, and nearly every partner in the larger cities made that amount, worked similar hours, and seemed completely miserable. Story 40. I tried that kind of schedule for a while, balancing 4 different part-time jobs. The pay was nowhere near what is being proposed, but I would not accept the offer. Working that kind of schedule, even single and in my 20s, resulted in a trip to the emergency room for cardiac symptoms. I would much rather be relatively poor and be able to enjoy time with my family. Money can buy a lot of things, but it cannot buy me a relationship with my spouse and child. Story 41. Working an average of 12 hours every single day of the week for only $350,000? Absolutely not. Maybe if it was in the seven figures, I'd contemplate it. Nowadays, you can hardly even find a livable house for $350,000, depending on your location, obviously. Story 42. People are doing it now for around $150,000. I know a few. They would probably take a doubled salary for their current hours. Me? I make $80,000 with a very family-friendly schedule. I'm not losing time at a job in place of my family. Story 43. With 8 hours of sleep, there are 112 awake hours in the week. So, 22 to 32 hours is my free time? Sounds like a lot of emergency medical services workers, but for not even a third of that pay. Story 44. I used to work an 88-hour week when mining in West Texas, but I always got a week off after that work week. I made $80,000 then. If I could work that week and not receive the following week off for $300,000 or more, I would most certainly do so. If you put me in the Texas heat framing houses doing heating, ventilation, and air conditioning or roofing work for 80 hours week after week with no break, I would likely die.